You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin. You're here on Maximum Medicine. Thank you for being here. I'm joined with my guest, Sharon Tate, and we'll talk in just a minute. Just apologies ahead of time if my voice cuts in and out, and if I have to switch off the video. The wildfires in Nova Scotia have actually affected the air in the DC area. Now, I know those of you who live out west have had that happen a lot, but this is new territory for us. But the haze has affected the internet signals. It's affected the breathing. Well, you guys know, I'm not telling some of you anything new. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is thank you to you guys listening for your support. My book, Maximize Your Healing Power, which was launched on May 23rd, hit #1 Amazon in the first week. Excellent. And just a reminder that if you go to Amazon to buy Maximize Your Healing Power or Barnes & Noble or Inner Traditions, take your order number to my website. There's a page for the book. Put it in there. All right, you guys, I'm back. Inner challenges, as I was saying, things have been wacky. But if you buy my book, which I hope you do, because I think it'll be very helpful, you can take the order number to the page on my website, drsharonmartin.com, enter the order number and get free downloads. And one of the pieces of writing there will introduce you to my guest tonight, Sharon Tate. Sharon, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So Sharon is here to talk about her book, Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on our pervasive culture of abuse, published earlier this year. She is an author, 7 times published. She has a podcast, Voices of the Sacred. She is all about social justice, and her book is about how to reclaim the justice in terms of the pervasive abuse in our country. And she's also, we're going to talk about this at the end, we don't want to leave this out, she is into goddess spirituality, and that's pretty cool. She is in the film Femme, Women Healing the World, which is a docu-film. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sharon.
And thank you for donating a piece of writing for the giveaways. People are downloading those when they read the book, and that introduces them to you. And so thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So you were called to write this book. And truthfully, it seems like a gloomy topic. So how do you open the window to a gloomy topic? I'd like to hear how you got to the book, and how do you then show us how to overcome some of humans' really bad challenges, our frailties?
Well, I think because I've been a social justice activist for such a long time, and it was actually goddess spirituality, the values of goddess spirituality, which brought me to that point of being a social justice activist. For me, while the subject seems grim, I don't think it's any more grim than talking about domestic violence or, economic, inequality or climate change or anything like that. It's a reality, unfortunately. And I feel like while, maybe some people want to put blinders on, this really gives them an opportunity to look back at their life, look back at their, look at their current life and see if they could have a better quality of life. Because my whole premise is, I was a social justice activist, I still am, and I didn't recognize the abuse that I was normalizing in my own life. And I thought, wow, if I can do that, if I'm just seeing it in other people's lives and I don't see it in my own, how many other people maybe need to become acquainted with this idea so they can maybe do a re-examination of where they're at and decide if they want to make some changes so that they can have a better quality of life. And this, I think, was the next natural progression for me from where I was before the idea of the book was birthed in my mind. As I said, I was a social justice activist. I was very interested in caring economics and partnership versus domination and patriarchy. But then I was assaulted by someone wielding a stun gun. And while I was trying to deal with PTSD symptoms, which I didn't recognize as a condition, PTSD, my husband fell and hit his head and ends up with a brain injury. And our life was totally turned on its head. And we found ourselves without jobs, without income, without a roof over our head, and our lives were turned into utter chaos. Now, if I fast forwarded to today, I will tell you that was all a gift, because where we are now is a wonderful place, and I'm so glad to be here. But this was a journey of awakening. And I feel like it's an important story to tell on so many levels, because when I was healing from the PTSD, I really got a chance to peel back the layers of the onion and look at things that we just accept as normal, that we really shouldn't be looking at as normal. It's really abuse or exploitation or domination. And until we can do that, until we can recognize these things for what they are and not just the way it is or normal, I don't think we have a good chance of changing it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Being aware is the most important first step. But yes, it takes courage to look, doesn't it?
Well, it does, because it means, you're confronted with a choice then, aren't you? You're gonna deal with the devil that you know and maybe stay miserable and oppressed or depressed, or you're gonna risk and maybe make some changes, but change is always, it's uncomfortable. So, we're, it reminds me of domestic violence. So many women stay with the abusive husband because at least they know what to expect. Now, that's not a healthy attitude, and I'm sure it's more complicated than that. It always is. But in order to, get out of that toxic job, maybe not have to deal with these toxic people, you do have to look at it, see it for what it is, and start looking for exit strategies. And I'm talking about stuff on our very personal level, as well as institutionalized abuse and exploitation as well, on a much larger, grander scale.
Right. Well, I want to take a short break, and then we'll come back, and I want you to go tell us, if you would, the various places this exploitation might be hiding. So
Yeah.
let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin, Maximum Medicine, and I'm here talking with Karen Tate, talking about the pervasive nature of abuse and the places that abuse is actually living amongst us, and we may not even know. So, Karen, tell us what you discovered when you opened your eyes to this.
Well, I first, as I was trying to heal myself from the PTSD, I started to look back into my early years to see perhaps if I was susceptible to this. Was there any sorts of abuses that I just accepted as normal that potentially could have caused me to make the decisions I was making as an adult? And I discovered actually a lot of things that I hadn't probably thought about for 20 or 30, years. And I think they could very well have played a part in my choices as an adult, for instance, to maybe, make a choice to, I'll just give this as a random example, maybe you stay at a job you're not happy with for the paycheck because you have security issues or self-esteem issues, and it feels safer to do that and more comfortable to do that than try to do something, go to another job that might be better for you. But then as I looked outside my personal situation, I started looking at all different aspects of our life. And in the book, I do that chapter by chapter, after I give my personal story and redefine abuse and exploitation, I look at abuse in academia, abuse in religion, families and friends, society and culture, the military, corporations, government, the media, all of these different aspects of our life. And I started looking at things within these, these areas, and stuff that was going on within these areas that we just accept as normal. It's the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it. And I would think at the very least, we can name it for what it is so that, there's not manufactured consent in a way, and we're sort of complicit in, this being okay in the way it should be. And I mean, just some examples. Let's take academia, for instance. I grew up in the South. You didn't, the gatekeepers that control what you learn, that's a really weighty responsibility. Well, growing up in the South, we didn't learn the full ramifications of the Civil War. We didn't learn about ideas like Juneteenth. The idea of sexism and racism; those weren't things that were really talked about. Especially at the dinner table. These were just accepted belief systems, and they were never really examined, or there was no critical thinking about, well, maybe we should look at this closer. Is this something we really still want to have as an aspect in our life? You think about some of our holidays, for instance, Thanksgiving. What a sanitized version of what we think of as the first Thanksgiving. We aren't taught about maybe the doctrine of discovery that the Pope issued that gave white explorers the license to go to other countries. And if they didn't find white Christians, then they could take away the land of the indigenous people, like happened here. And so we have this whitewashed version of what, of what Thanksgiving is, as just one example. I mean, right now we have, people who don't want to teach critical race theory or women's studies, or, have us learn the real history of the United States, because we don't want people to feel bad. And I guess I kind of say, well, I don't think we're that fragile as humans. Wouldn't we really want to know what happened and examine what went on and make a decision about, if that was a good thing, and does it affect today? And if it does, what do we want to do different, moving forward?
So you're probably horrified by the removal of all the books in the state of Florida.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, whenever someone tries to take away something that is going to inform and educate, that's alarm bells going off in my head. And because there's a strategy there, they want to, I think there are people that want to keep things the way they are. I think an uneducated public is easier to control. And I think they're easily duped by slick con men. You take the media, for instance. The media is supposed to be the fourth estate, which protects our democracy. And we just saw with the Fox Dominion lawsuit that Fox News chose to dupe their listeners and let them think the election had been stolen because they were worried about ratings, which, means money. Well, they've totally relinquished their responsibility as the fourth estate every time they dispel disinformation or tell their listeners lies, even if it's what their listeners want to hear, you know?
Mhm.
I think about corporations. If, say, for instance, you're in a human resources department and your boss or the chairman of the board, whoever it is, says, well, we have to fill these 10 positions, but, we don't want women for this job, or we can't have somebody 55 for that job, or, we're not going to look at applications from Black people. Well, they are telling you to break the law, you know but do we think about that consciously? And we know it happens every day. There's ageism, there's sexism that happens in the workplace. And if your employer is actively giving you instruction to commit those sorts of things, or maybe you don't want to hire a veteran or a disabled person, those things are against the law. Or maybe your employer wants you to do something that's unsafe. He has an obligation to provide a safe work environment. And I can't tell you the number of people who wrote into me when I put out a call for the community to send me little brief snippets of their experiences of abuse and exploitation. And I'd say probably 6 out of 10 were easily abuses people suffered in their jobs, you know, and we do it to keep the paycheck. Well, if you're going to make a conscious decision to do it to keep the paycheck, at least be aware of what you're doing. Just because that employer has power over you, and and economically you're dependent on them. You still should be aware of what's happening in the workplace and what compromises you're potentially making.
It really is, these situations seem to me that they really are about a structure in place where someone is over somebody else.
True. And, as women, I think women, especially by, our psychological makeup, so many of us having grown up without the idea of a feminine face of God, we are automatically conditioned from the very beginning, I think, and I'm talking collectively, not in absolutes, but we tend to obey authority. Especially male authority, because we've grown up with this hierarchy of there's God, there's man, and then there's the rest of us on the planet who are here to serve men and to serve God. And I think, when we, at first, our parents have power over us. Then if you're a woman, maybe your husband has power over you. Your boss has power over you. And you look, maybe your priest, your rabbi has power over you to a certain extent. Your social clique influences you. The news, who we depend on to tell us what's going on in the world, they have power over us. Academia, who we are relying on to educate us so we can be discerning and fully functioning humans in the world, they have power over us. I mean, there's so many different aspects of the world out there, that we depend on others to do right by us. And so often it doesn't happen, from families all the way to, political parties and religion and corporations and all the rest.
Right. And one of the things that you said is it's like it's all around you and you may not even recognize it. And in that sense, you're numb to it. That you
Yes.
don't even. So I want to hear, we're going to take a short break, and then I want to hear about how your work with goddess energy helped in situations like this. What are the tenets of it from a spiritual point of view that can impact in a good way? So we'll
Okay.
take a short break. Hi, everybody. We're back. I'm Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine. I'm here with Sharon Tate, and we're talking about the pervasive nature of abuse and how it's there in so many situations, this top-down quality, this exploitation, how we've become numb to it. But one thing that Sharon has also explored is goddess spirituality. And let's see how that has helped her see fixes to this pervasive nature. Sharon, tell us about your goddess spirituality.
Well, when my husband and I left Louisiana and left the Bible Belt and moved to California, one of the things I, bumped up against was the idea of the sacred feminine. Now, living in the South, I grew up a Catholic, so I knew about Mary, Mary, the mother of Jesus. But looking back on it, I believe that I was taught about Mary's persona. She was rather passive and benign, and she was really just in service to God. Even though she birthed a God, she was not equal to God, right? And so
She was certainly no Kali energy.
No, no. Now, I will say, looking back on her, I have a different theory that I'm willing to entertain, because, she lived under the yoke of Rome, right? And that could not have been an easy thing. And I like to think if Mary and Jesus were actually real people, that Jesus probably learned his social justice at her knee. So maybe she was the power behind the throne, so to speak, if you will. But, when I discovered that there was such a thing as a feminine face of God beyond Mary, and I started learning about the many different cultures around the world that had goddesses for thousands of years, even before there was a male god in humanity's psyche, I started to, understand it from a perspective of deity. But then also, as it, you get more into it, you see it as a subconscious construct, as like an archetype or a role model potentially for women. And then finally, there are values of the sacred feminine that go along with goddess spirituality. And so when you take that as a whole, that was a big influence, because here now suddenly I was not a second class citizen anymore, because, of course, women are also created in the image of goddess, while men are created in the image of God. And that right there starts to open women up to the idea that they're not less than, they're not second class, they value themselves more, they have more self-esteem. And there's a whole thing on Carol Christ wrote about the 4 reasons women need the goddess, but that's for another show. But
So what are the values of goddess spirituality?
well, they're well, first of all, love. Love, and so in that sense, it goes hand in glove with Jesus's teachings. But it's also a sacredness for all life. It's our interconnection of us with the cosmos. It's about equality and diversity. I believe it's about nurturing and generosity and gratitude. It's about having versus, I'm sorry, it's about being versus having. It's about valuing our bodies. It's about the sacredness of sexuality. It's about, equality and peace and love and partnership. And we realize that all of these qualities are really looked at as weak under our patriarchal system. And so they become second class. They aren't at the core of our being. They're maybe on the, on the fringes. But if we were somehow able to rethink our values, and we made greed taboo, for instance, and we didn't value people by their assets or their position or their influence, I think we would start to create a society that had a lot healthier values, which would then translate into how we shape the world.
Mhm. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about some of well, I'm a child of the 60s, so this will age me, but the idea that in the 60s and early 70s that the hippies had the communal living. And I was thinking about how everyone contributed. Everyone was a vital part, like bees in a hive. Everybody had their job to do, and the community was stronger for each person's contribution. And nobody was, unless you did, of course, hear of communes that became cults with their leaders and things like that. But I was thinking about what I saw, the idealism of that. And that idea that everybody who's a member contributes. And it's interesting, I was reading somewhere, I forget, and I think it was an African culture, that if one is hurt, the whole tribe is hurt. So the wellness of the whole village, the whole tribe, is dependent on the well-being of each individual. And that's a remarkable aspiration, isn't it?
It is. And I don't want to sound Pollyanna with all of this, like we think that we can achieve some utopian dream. But I think we could do an awful lot better than what we're doing now, because we have this hierarchy of who's important in society. And, wasn't it interesting during COVID who was actually important during society? It wasn't the hedge fund manager or the basketball player making millions. It was the guy that kept the stock on on the shelves in the store, and maybe who delivered your food. I think COVID really opened our eyes in so many ways as to people whose jobs we should value more, and maybe even gave people a pause, from that hamster wheel that we're on, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or whatever your schedule is, to stop and think about their quality of life. And I think, politicians will say right now, oh, well, gee, nobody wants to work. Well, I don't think that's it at all. I think maybe people have reassessed and decided that they want to work for a company that they can feel good about, and maybe where they're going to get decent pay and decent benefits instead of being exploited. I mean, I remember out of school, I made it, I was just a typist, and I had all sorts of benefits that suddenly disappeared from most people a decade later, or corporations were going to, working someone 38 hours a week instead of 40, so they didn't have to pay them any benefits. And unions were being decimated, so people didn't have leverage to negotiate better benefits. And, employers used to make 50 times more than their workers. Now they're making like 500 and 900 times what their workers make. I mean, it's just so totally out of balance. And everything is a commodity, everything is a commodity. And that's so different than the way goddess spirituality looks at things. We don't look at nature and try to make everything something to make money off of. It's about the beauty, the awe, the healing, that is nature, because, we are all interconnected. If you are, if you, believe in this way.
You said something there that I really resonate with, because the idea that I have two thoughts on that. The idea that, oh, people just don't want to work. Well, no, they had the opportunity to stop, a forced stop, but regardless, to reflect on, why do I want to run myself into the ground for this? This is not what life is about. This is not, and that's one of the grumbles that my generation, we often talk about the mindset of a millennial worker, because it's so different. I was brought up, you have a job and you give your all, and the millennials are, wait a second, this is a job, but this is not my life.
True.
This
And
is
It,
mhm.
and well, I know you probably remember how things shifted. It used to be, if you worked worked for a company for years and years, you could maybe expect to retire there and have retirement and dignity. Well, what happened? All the, retirement funds got pilfered. Suddenly there was no security in the jobs anymore. You could, it was right to works, what an oxymoron, they call it right to work, but that just meant your employer could fire you for any reason, even unjust reasons. And so we went, why should we give our all to an employer where we have no security even, or can expect, decent benefits, or if we work harder, we can benefit more from it, rather than just the boss being the only one who benefits from our increased labor.
How do we start to, we open our eyes, we see it now, how do we change it?
Well, that's going to vary from person to person, but the biggest step is allowing yourself to see it. Because I've had people say they just really don't want to see it. Life's too hard as it is. They don't have the energy to, examine anymore. But I think it's a necessity. And, so once we see it, I think, I'm not saying we have to turn our life on its head, right? So maybe you have a friend, you maybe have a toxic relative, maybe you have a toxic employer. Let's just say it like that. So I think you can start to look at, okay, how are they toxic? How are they affecting me? And start to create options and exit strategies. Maybe you hold the friend at arm's length, or maybe you have a heart to heart conversation instead of biting your tongue, or maybe you simply don't see that person anymore. You phase them out of your life. You might even be able to do something like that with the relative. Now, with the job, that's different. You depend on that paycheck, right? I think, you start planning exit strategies. If you can't transfer to another department, maybe you look at, well, what have you been wanting to do all your life? Maybe you switch, not just employers, maybe you even think about switching careers, but you do it carefully, methodically. You don't jump out of the frying pan into the fire, but just the acts of beginning to think about this and plan even baby steps, it will do wonders, I think, for your mental health. Because I think a lot of us, potentially have suffered trauma, maybe still suffer it, or maybe suffering from depression. It would not surprise me in the least. The reason we have so many overdoses in the country right now with fentanyl and all of these other drugs is that people are medicating themselves because their lives are so grim. and they don't see an end in sight. They don't have the support to maybe take some suggestions like I'm suggesting now. And I think another important thing is self-care. You have to, this isn't easy stuff. I think you have to have someone to talk to, whether it's a trusted friend or it's a therapist. And I think we start to, when we start to feel better emotionally, I think it makes it easier to take steps on the external world. If that makes sense.
Well, I was reflecting in my community, a lot of people work for the local factory. And over the past 6 months, the factory has mandated overtime. And there are people working 16 days in a row. But the last time, 15, 20 years ago, they tried to have a union, everybody was fired. So everybody's fearful. But I think you're right in that if you're aware, you can see little places where you can get out of the way of that abusive energy, or maybe even in the case of this factory, maybe have a lunchtime employee meeting to talk about maybe saying to the boss, listen, we're all under the gun here. We're dying with the structure. So yes, there are little steps, but it is hard to break patterns that are this pervasive, isn't it?
It is. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be done. People do it, and I'm not a special person. I managed to make major changes. I think by going about it methodically and carefully, and with support and help. With a lot of self-care. And I think we can see a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to be willing to be, to not choose the familiar abuse under the uncomfortableness of potential change. And I think that's what stops people sometimes. That risk or that change is uncomfortable, so they let themselves stay stuck. And they might not even realize they're depressed.
Right. Well, I want to talk more. We're going to take a short break. I want to talk more about the self-care and the things you learned in doing that for yourself. So let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Everybody, I'm back. I'm Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine, back with Karen Tate. And we talked about the pervasive nature of exploitation and abuse in our society, and how awareness is really the first step. And it does take a lot of courage to make change. But one thing Karen said that I want to spend our last segment on, because that's important for many reasons in our lives, how we have to take self-care. So Karen, tell me about that, how it's related to the abuse you got yourself out of, and then in general, the benefits of that.
Well, there can be so many different aspects of self-care. I would use, talk therapy. I had 2 or 3 wonderful friends who, when I would peel away another layer of the onion and had to talk about something, they lent an ear. I can't tell you how just getting it out of me, made such a difference. And then it was also understanding how some of these things that I looked back on, saw how they were affecting me today, because I had a complicated relationship with my mother. And I thought, well, once I got away from, her house, I wasn't under her roof anymore. I thought once I got away, well, I was done with it. I could kind of just wash my hands of it. But, traumas or belief systems and things that we grow up with that are in our subconscious, they follow us. Even if maybe we're away from the trouble, if you will, you know. So I was willing to look at things. I was willing to look at the fact that I came from a racist South, grew up with the idea of white supremacy being right on, listened to Fox News, thought Rush Limbaugh was king. You know, I had to face all of that and realize what a horror show that was, and claim it without shame. You know, and I look at that now and I say, well, you know what? If I could shift my belief systems and shed that and educate myself, so that I know why all of those beliefs were unhealthy and certainly not very spiritual or you know, or good as far as being a human, then other people can too, you know. You know, so it's self-care, and self-care is so obviously, you know, education. It's using different modalities that might help you tap in to know yourself. You know, when I traveled to Greece, I would see on some of the ruins on the walls of temples of Asclepius, the healing god, know thyself. And I didn't really understand that until I did these reflections, you know, during, you know, this, you know, this reflection time of mine. But we really do have to, you know, we really have to know ourselves, and I think we have to be willing to find our authentic self, you know, because so many of us maybe are who our parents wanted us to be or who society tells us we are. And you know, I think we have to have the courage to find who we really are, you know, rather than who others maybe want us to be. You know, I think we have to look at everything around us and say, okay, is what I'm looking at partnership or domination? You know, and if it's domination, then I think we have to find a fix to maybe rid our lives of that. You know, you know, we have to just rethink our value systems. Is the guy in the pulpit talking about stuff that I really believe? You know, is it really what's best for the most of us or all of us? You know,
So what I'm just taken by is thinking about you making those important changes, and you're an independent personality. You're a strong personality. There are people who may not be as strong, and I'm wondering if you could reflect for us, how would your goddess spirituality be of benefit to someone who is trying to make these hard changes?
well, I think if they wanted to start to practice goddess spirituality, they would start off by looking at things in their life that they could really feel grateful for. You know, gratitude is like a magic bullet. When
Mhm.
you feel like you have something to be grateful for, even if it's the birds outside your window singing or your beautiful cat that you can pet, you know, laying in your lap, you know, or you know, the sun coming up in the morning because now you have you know, another day that you have the opportunity to live life to the fullest. You know, gratitude is such an important thing because you know what? I think when we feel gratitude, it's a lot harder to hate other people, you know, because inside, you know, we're then filled with generosity and we can smile at our neighbor and we don't hate other people for their differences. You know, I think, you know, gratitude is so important, and anyone can practice gratitude. They can practice, you know, generosity. We all have a smile to share with someone. We can all maybe, you know, if we know the widow down the street, you know, when it gets to the end of the month, maybe she doesn't have enough, you know, to buy food. We could bring her a casserole. You know, we could, you know, there's a single mother in the neighborhood. Maybe you can volunteer to watch her kids. You know, you know, while sometimes it does take strength and independence, sometimes it's just these acts of kindness and generosity and gratitude that that make all the difference in our own psyche, and then how we then see the world and treat other people in the world. I think we also have to look at what do we value and stop valuing money, because money
So
doesn't.
one of the things I was thinking though, when you were talking about gratitude, and I was thinking about it shamanically, because I like to think about the energy field and how that when you flood your energy field with these good feelings from your heart, generosity, kindness, gratitude, you are really flushing out poisons from your system. And when I think about the imprints of trauma and things, now some are deeply held imprints, but if you flush your field with that, then you are restoring the natural life force and vitality, and you are flushing good chi all through your whole energy field. So I like that because that's a simple step, no matter what. I remember, is it Viktor Frankl? Am I remembering the name right? Who was in a concentration camp. He was a psychiatrist, and he found meaning in a dandelion growing up between the cracks in the concrete. And I forget, what was his book? A Life of Meaning or something like that. Anyway, gratitude, no matter what, that floods your system. I like to think about it from an energy point of view. Flood your system with that high vibrating chi.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful way to say it. And obviously, I totally agree, because when we're feeling that, I think we are our best self. And I don't, and if we can do that on a regular basis, and that becomes the essence of who we are, then I think it's easier to reject these isms out there that turn one person against another, if you will. And I think it's really important to recognize that we can't keep doing the same things over and over and expect a different result. I mean, I think we really have to have the courage to look at our external world as well as our internal world, and look at the people that we send, that we vote for and send to office. I'm rather convinced that Americans are a traumatized society, and because of that, maybe some of the people who get into office are abusers. We are sending abusers to office because we have been traumatized and we don't know any better. And and I think that just perpetuates abuse and exploitation, rather than creating a world where the common good actually means something, where we look out for one another, and we have a life centered on on social justice and sacredness and equality and diversity and partnership, where we create win-win situations. It doesn't have to be someone, when we sit at whatever the negotiation table is, if we can create an end game where both people walk away with something, rather than winning and losing, and just not measure
I
ourselves
need
by our
to
efforts.
just, I need to interrupt because we're out of time, darn it. But I want to have the last 45 seconds for you to tell everybody the title of your book, where they can get it, and your website, because I know you also lead sacred tours. So if we close up with that, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Martin. Well, my website is my name. It's KarenTate.net, and it's really the hub for everything that I'm doing out there in the world. You can find my radio show, Voices of the Sacred Feminine. It's a podcast that's been on the air for 13 years, and it airs every Wednesday at 11, or you can catch it from the archives. My books are all there. You can get them at all the usual places. Normalizing Abuse is the new book that just came out last month. And there are also goddess books there that talk about many of the things we've covered today. And there's a Sacred Places of Goddess book as well. That was my first book that I wrote after traveling across 5 continents, visiting sites of the sacred feminine around the world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen Tate, for being here. I'm Doc Martin, Maximum Medicine. Thank you all for listening. and very nice discussion tonight. And you guys have a good week. I'll see you all in a month. Thank you. You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.